Alright, moving on to our next Patreon request, and this one comes from Josh Head, who asked me to do a Batman and a crossover with Batman and the movie The Cell. So, as always, if you guys would like to have a Patreon request done, just hit the link below, head on over to my Patreon, hit the 3rd tier, that will allow you access to do so. But other than that, let's get started with the video. Yeah, so forgive me because it's been a while since I've watched The Cell. And also, this was meant to be a Persona 5 Batman The Cell crossover, but I've never done any. I have no clue what Persona 5. I've heard of it, but I've never played it or had any of the lore. So I asked, hey, can I modify it a bit? And yeah. So here we are with Batman The Cell. So here we go. So Batman has come to Arkham, and he basically has captured the Mad Hatter. He stopped his latest ploy. He's putting him in Arkham, but there's a problem. You see, after Batman apprehended Tetch, basically what he discovered is that Jervis Tetch, it was another kidnapping plot, and in here he's kidnapped. He thought there were 5 women who he did find, but there are still 5 other women who are still missing, and all across Gotham. And Batman, Batman comes in, like, dragging Jervis, who's got the shit beat out of him, but he still won't talk. Like, all he can do is just talk about, like, Wonderland and all that, so he, like, just throws him into Arkham and is like, I'm going to do more to you, Jervis, until you start talking. And that's when a voice comes and is like, wait a minute, Batman, there may be another solution. And that solution comes from Catherine Deans. Deans, of course, created the machine to get into the serial killer known as Charles Rudolph Stranger, and he's heard about all of this, like this special machine that allows you to go into the psyche of a serial killer and, like, explore their mind to dig out their secrets. And the experiment was used on Charles Rudolph in the first experiment, and Batman basically says, yeah, I've heard your research, and I take it you came to Arkham to experiment further because there's no better place of madness than here. And she's like, right. And he's like, who are you going to experiment on? Joker? And they're like, oh god, no. The machine would probably, like, overload if we tried to experiment on Joker right out the gate. But this seems to be a good idea to use him. To use Tetch as our subject if he's still hiding those other 5 women. So I can go into his head and basically dig out that information. So Batman is like, no, I'll go in and I will go into Jervis's head and find those and find that information. And they're like, we're not trusting. And Catherine is just like, we're not trusting you with this technology. I can go in there. It's no problem. I can go in there and I can find that information that we're missing, and it will be, it'll be super easy, barely an inconvenience. And she's like, yeah, it's the Mad Hatter. I could understand if, like, it was like Two-Face or Joker, but I went into Rudolph's head and it was fine. And they're like, and Batman goes, that one serial killer is a cakewalk compared to what you'll find in the madness of Arkham. I face these monsters every day. I'm going in. And of course, the members of Arkham and even Gordon's there, and they're like, we're running out of time, just put him in the machine, it'll be fine. So, begrudgingly, they do put Batman in the machine, they hook up Jervis, and Batman goes into the Mad Hatter's mind. And of course, and he's like, the moment Batman, like, steps into his head, he's like, typical. And it's like a twisted Alice in Wonderland, and Batman's just like, typical. He's like, you're not special, Jervis. I hope you can hear me. This is just basic for you. I would be almost impressed if it was someone. I think even, like, Joker's one thing, but, like, I would expect some level of creativity, from someone like you. Riddler, yeah. Anyone else? Fine. And that's when Jervis is like, he hears Jervis's voice in the distance, and he's like, oh, you want originality? How about this, Batman? And just summons this huge, like, steampunk Jabberwocky, and Batman's like, not impressed. and he like fights it, and he fights it beats it, and then continues on further and further into Jervis's mind, encountering other twisted versions of Wonderland. If this does sound like that the episode of The Batman where Batman went into the mind of Joker, well, that was kind of like what the only thing I could think of for a Batman the Cell crossover, was doing something like that. But yeah, it's the best I could do with what I got. So I'm trying my best to do this. So Batman continues to fight his way through other versions of Wonderland, like like he also encounters a version of the Cheshire Cat who keeps trying to lead him astray, but he keeps going forward. He fights like hundreds of cards that look like, instead of like, plastic playing cards, they're like made of human skin, and they have like faces where the symbols should be, and they're all screaming. He fights a version of the Queen of Hearts who's like this huge spider woman. Batman is just continuing on to find these other, these 5 missing Alices, and he's like every little piece he discovers something else, and he's like trying to force himself to in the physical world to speak the name, like the locations of where they are. He's like forcing himself to talk, where Gordon and the rest of the GCPD can like locate and discover where these missing girls are. However, what's happening on the outside is that Jervis, because he's so Jervis is so intelligent, is that he's actually like his madness is so great that it's actually like breaking the machine down, and if that happens, Batman's subconscious will be trapped in a forever Wonderland in Mad Hatter's mind. So Batman's now like just racing against the clock to like stop this from happening. But he still keeps fighting through. He even encounters a version of the Mad Hatter himself, who looks like this tall, lanky, almost like a Slender Man version of the Mad Hatter, who Tetchin envisioned himself holding the last Alice. Batman fights him, and as they're like, no, like Mad Hatter's like, no, this is my mind. How can you, how can you beat me in my mind? And he's like, it's not a great imagination, Jervis, and just punches him and just starts beating him down. And Batman's like, it may be your mind, but no matter what, it's my world. And Batman just like changes all of the mental reality in Jervis's head, and becomes like this new version of the Jabberwock, like this huge bat-like version of the Jabberwock, and scares Jervis so bad that he has to like he shoots up and like tells them where the last Alice is. He's like screaming it, and he's just like, don't let the Jabberwock get me, and he's like, and Dr. Deans is like, oh my god, what did Batman do to him? And Gordon just goes, same as Batman always does. He's scared, he gets the job done. Batman wakes up, he's like, not a fan of the machine, needs some work, and proceeds to leave to go find the last Alice. So there you go, guys. That is pretty much the Batman Cell crossover. Not so much a crossover, but like, it's not really much I could do with it. Like, I try my best on this one. And yeah, no matter what, I was just going to be like a retread of the Batman episode that was written by Greg Weisman. But yeah, either way, hope you all enjoyed this. I'd like to thank Josh Head for this Patreon request and continued patronage. Other than that, hope you all enjoyed this. I'm Mr. Multiverse. I'll see you next time in the Multiverse.